ground. Continue.
I'd like to thank all the witnesses for coming. For say a special welcome to Mr. Hutchinson for coming to our country and sharing your experiences. I want to start with you, Mr. Hutchinson, because I think you're a valuable resource, particularly valuable resource for us today, because I think of the American experience. I think it's a fair comment, a fair characterization of the government's approach to crime right now, that they're taking a get tough on crime approach. They're bringing in deliberately more mandatory minimums. Their policies will, without doubt, lock up more people for longer periods of time. An estimate from corrections that we saw about a couple of weeks ago is that they expect an influx of about 30% more prisoners into the federal prison system over the next 2 to 3 years. Now, if I understand your evidence and the right on crime perspective, it's that you've had experience with this very approach, I think, over the last quarter century, over the last 25 years of that. So I wonder if you could share with us, many states in the United States have tried these policies over the last 25 years. Can you tell us, have they been effective in reducing recidivism, and have those policies been effective in reducing crime?
Well, the crime rate's gone down in the United States, and I would probably argue that the increased incarceration rates had a positive impact on reducing the crime rate. Now, everybody can argue statistics in different ways, but that's my view on it. At the same time that we had this crackdown, we made some mistakes, and I hope that you can learn from those mistakes. One of them is, when you talk about mandatory minimums, it created a lot of unfairness in our sentencing. There was instances of someone being peripherally involved, a girlfriend getting brought in, getting hit with a mandatory minimum, getting 10 years or more in prison. And so we created escape valves. That's not a very technical term, but it gave the judge more discretion to avoid a mandatory minimum when it created unfairness. And so we had to do some legislative fixes. The second mistake we made was, Professor Waller mentioned reentry programs. We didn't do a very good job of working to prevent recidivism whenever they came out of prison.
Can I just stop there and ask you, focusing a bit on recidivism, because I'm told that in Texas, as an example, that was a leading proponent of those policies, that the recidivism rate is some 50%. In fact, it was described as a revolving door. Fully 50% of inmates in the Texas correctional system came out of jail and were back in jail within, I think, a 36-month period. So would you agree with me that the recidivism rates have been largely unimpacted by that policy?
I would not disagree with it. Those statistics are appalling, and the recidivism rate is much, much too high. And that's why I applaud Texas, based upon the Right on Crime initiative. Instead of going to another expansion of prisons, put money into trying to help those that are coming out to prevent and to reduce that recidivism rate. So I think they've learned from that lesson, and I would agree with your point.
Okay. So I just want to, before I leave you, just understand your position then. You have signed on to the Right on Crime initiative, which, if I understand it correctly, is suggesting that that the government, whether it's state or federal level in your country, stop prison expansion and instead put more money into other areas, crime prevention, etc. If those policies reduce the crime rate, why are you not advocating a continuation of those policies?
Well, and that's where you've got to be careful not to go too far. And let me make it clear that it's a set of principles. And what the Right on Crime initiative says is it's the right thing for conservatives to reevaluate our incarceration policies in the United States. And that's a very important statement, because as conservatives, we've historically said, lock them up, let's don't worry about the budget for prisons, because we have to do that. So you might, in political terms, you say this is cover. This is saying conservative leaders are saying it's all right for conservatives across the United States to reevaluate incarceration policies in light of these principles. We're not saying everything we've done is wrong, but we're saying it's the right thing to do in terms of fairness, to take another look at it, to see if to make sure we're incarcerating the right people and we're getting the performance measures accomplished that we need.
Yeah, and if I can quote Rick Perry, the governor of Texas, he said, "I believe we can take an approach to crime that is both tough and smart. There are thousands of nonviolent offenders in the system whose future we cannot ignore. Let's focus more resources on rehabilitating those offenders so we can ultimately spend less money locking them up again." I take it you would endorse that kind of statement?
Absolutely.
Okay, Mr. Waller, you've spent a lifetime, I think, advocating for victims. I think this government also says that we need to lock up more people and for longer periods of time in this country, and we need to. They invoke the concept of victims because that's what victims want and need. I'd like you to comment on that.
Well, some of the legislation that this government has introduced has basically been focused on the extreme cases, the sensational, exceptional, and dangerous cases. So expanding the use of dangerous offender legislation, for instance, would incarcerate more potentially dangerous people. They have done it in something similar in other areas, but I think we have to come back to what do we know from evidence actually reduces violent crime. And there's no doubt that Olson and Bernardo and so on need to be incarcerated. But there's also no doubt that we could reduce the murder rate in this country significantly by investing in the conclusions from the World Health Organization, from the Center of Disease Control. Stuff, by the way, on the Public Safety Canada website. Shows you this is the sort of stuff that Alberta is doing. Alberta is interested in victims and in reducing violence against them. Now, that's just prevention. Another part of right on crime are victim rights. And yes, there's now a federal ombudsman for crime victims, but it's a travesty of what's been done to get law enforcement to focus on victims, to get services adequately funded, to get restitution paid, which is one of the best ways to have an alternative to incarceration.
Thank you very much, Mr. Waller. We'll now